There are sentences that hurt more than silence. Not because they are loud. Not because they are violent. But because they come from the very lips you once kissed goodnight. Growing old is not just about weaker knees or slower steps. Sometimes, it is about hearing words from your own children that quietly strip away your dignity. A tone that dismisses you. A phrase that reduces your lifetime of sacrifice into something small. Have you ever experienced that? Before we go further, tell me in the comments, you're watching from where, Barazil Darimana? I truly want to know where you are listening from today, because this message may speak directly to your heart. When children are young, their words are innocent. When they become adults, their words carry weight. And sometimes, without realizing it, they begin to speak in ways that reveal something deeper: entitlement, impatience, even disrespect. The painful truth is this: respect is not lost in one big argument. It fades through repeated small phrases. A sarcastic comment. A dismissive, "You wouldn't understand." An irritated, "You're overreacting." These phrases may seem minor to outsiders, but to a parent, they cut deeply. Because behind them is a message: you no longer matter the way you used to. And here is something many seniors struggle to accept: when certain phrases are repeated without remorse, they are not accidents. They are patterns. Patterns reveal character. This video is not about turning against your children. It is not about anger or revenge. It is about recognizing moments when staying in the conversation slowly erodes your self-respect. There are words that deserve discussion. And there are words that require distance. If your grown child says certain things repeatedly, without empathy, without accountability, walking away is not weakness. It is wisdom. Because aging should not mean tolerating humiliation. In the next segments, we will talk about 7 specific phrases. Some of them may sound familiar. Some may shock you. But each one carries a message beneath the surface, a message you must learn to recognize. Not to create division, but to protect your dignity. Because at this stage of life, your peace is not optional. It is essential. And sometimes, the strongest response to a painful sentence is silence, followed by distance. One of the most damaging phrases an aging parent can hear is this: "You're overreacting." At first, it may sound small, almost harmless, maybe even logical. But when this sentence is repeated every time you express hurt, concern, or discomfort, it carries a hidden message: your feelings are not valid. And that is dangerous. As we grow older, we become more sensitive not because we are weak, but because we have experienced more. We understand tone. We recognize patterns. We feel shifts in energy quickly. So when something feels disrespectful, it is rarely imagined. Yet when your child responds with, "You're overreacting," they are not trying to understand. They are trying to dismiss. Dismissal slowly erodes dignity. If you calmly say, "That comment hurt me," and the reply is, "You're too sensitive," what happens next? You begin to question yourself. You hesitate to speak again. You shrink your emotions to avoid being labeled dramatic. Over time, silence replaces honesty. And when honesty disappears, connection becomes artificial. Walking away in that moment is not about punishing your child. It is about protecting your emotional truth. A simple response such as, "I don't feel heard right now. Let's talk later," is enough. Then disengage. Do not argue to prove that your feelings are real. You should not need evidence to justify pain. Healthy relationships allow space for emotion. Mature adults may disagree, but they do not belittle feelings. If your child consistently minimizes what you express, that pattern deserves attention. Remember this clearly: emotional invalidation is a form of disrespect. It may not shout. It may not insult directly. But it quietly tells you that your inner world does not matter. And at this stage of life, your inner world matters deeply. You have spent decades caring about others' feelings. You have adjusted, compromised, sacrificed. Now, when you speak, your voice deserves acknowledgement, not dismissal. If the phrase, "you're overreacting," appears occasionally in heated moments, it can be discussed later. But if it becomes a routine response whenever you express yourself, that is a signal. A signal that the conversation is no longer safe. And when a conversation becomes unsafe for your dignity, walking away is wisdom. Not drama. Not pride. Wisdom. Because protecting your emotional truth is one of the most powerful things you can do in old age. Another phrase that quietly creates distance is this: "you wouldn't understand." On the surface, it sounds harmless. Almost protective. As if your child is simply acknowledging a generational gap. But when this sentence is used repeatedly, it carries a subtle form of exclusion. It says, "your perspective is outdated. Your experience is irrelevant. Your voice is unnecessary." And that hurts more than open disagreement. You may not understand every modern trend, every technological shift, or every cultural change. But you understand life. You understand struggle. You understand consequences. Wisdom does not expire with age. When your child says, "you wouldn't understand," what they may truly mean is, "I don't want to explain," or worse, "your opinion doesn't matter." Over time, this phrase builds a wall. Instead of inviting conversation, it shuts the door. Instead of bridging generations, it deepens separation. And if you accept it silently again and again, you slowly remove yourself from meaningful dialogue. Walking away in that moment is not about pride. It is about refusing to be reduced. You can respond calmly, "Maybe I don't understand everything, but I still deserve respect." If the dismissal continues, end the conversation. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Simply with composure. Because dignity does not argue to be included. A healthy adult child may disagree with you. They may choose a different lifestyle. They may reject your advice. That is normal. But maturity speaks differently. It says, "I see your point, even if I choose differently." It does not say, "you wouldn't understand," as a final verdict. When this phrase becomes habitual, it signals emotional immaturity. And you must recognize the difference between disagreement and disrespect. Disagreement invites dialogue. Disrespect shuts it down. As a senior, your role may no longer be to direct decisions. But your presence still carries value. Your lived experience is not obsolete. It is earned. If someone consistently makes you feel intellectually inferior simply because of age, that is not generational difference. That is disregard. You do not need to prove that you are informed. You do not need to list your past achievements. You do not need to compete with modern knowledge. Sometimes the most powerful statement is quiet withdrawal. When you refuse to engage in conversations where your wisdom is dismissed, you protect your self-worth. And self-worth is not negotiable, at any age. If they truly believe you cannot understand, let them feel the absence of your perspective. Because one day, they may realize how much understanding you actually carried. When your adult child says, "It's my life, stay out of it," the tone matters more than the words. Independence is healthy. Every grown child has the right to make their own decisions. But when this phrase is delivered with hostility, it carries a deeper message: your care is intrusion. And that cuts deeply. As a parent, your instinct to care never disappears. Even when your children are 40 or 50 years old, a part of you still wants to protect them from pain. Advice does not come from control. It comes from experience. But when concern is repeatedly met with rejection, something inside you begins to close. You may start questioning whether you should speak at all. You hesitate before offering guidance. You suppress your thoughts to avoid conflict. And slowly, communication becomes shallow. Walking away in that moment is not about withdrawing love. It is about respecting your own emotional boundary. If your child says, "Stay out of it," you can respond calmly, "I respect that it's your decision." Then step back. No argument. No lecture. No attempt to prove your wisdom. Let adulthood carry its own weight. Because here is the truth. Maturity is proven through outcomes, not defiance. Sometimes adult children use this phrase not to protect independence, but to avoid accountability. They may want freedom without responsibility. And when advice challenges them, they label it interference. You must recognize the pattern. If your concern is consistently framed as control, and your intention is consistently misunderstood, continuing the conversation only fuels tension. Distance, in that moment, becomes clarity. You are not obligated to stand where you are not welcome. There is strength in saying less. There is dignity in stepping back. And there is peace in allowing others to learn through their own consequences. As parents age, one of the hardest lessons is releasing control. But releasing control does not mean accepting disrespect. You can let go of decision-making while still expecting courtesy. If the phrase, "It's my life, stay out of it," is spoken once in frustration, it can be forgiven. But if it becomes the default response to any involvement, it signals emotional immaturity. Independence should not erase gratitude. Freedom should not erase respect. And if your presence is repeatedly treated as interference rather than love, walking away is not abandonment. It is wisdom. Because sometimes, loving from a distance protects both your dignity and your peace. Few sentences reverse reality as sharply as this one. After everything I do for you. When those words come from your own child, they carry a quiet sting. Because for decades, the direction of sacrifice was different. You were the one who gave without counting. You were the one who showed up without keeping score. So when help is suddenly presented as leverage, something feels wrong. Healthy support is given freely. It does not arrive wrapped in guilt. It does not demand emotional repayment. And it certainly does not rewrite history. When your child says, "After everything I do for you," what they may be implying is this: "You owe me." That shift, from love to obligation, changes the foundation of the relationship. Gratitude should move in both directions. Yes, if your child helps you, appreciation is natural. But appreciation is different from indebtedness. Love within a family is not a transaction. If assistance becomes a tool to silence you, control you, or shame you, that is not generosity. That is power disguised as kindness. Walking away in that moment is essential. You can calmly respond, "I appreciate your help, but I don't want it used against me." Then disengage. Do not argue about who sacrificed more. Do not revisit decades of parenting. Dignity does not compete in scorekeeping. When help is genuine, it strengthens connection. When help is weaponized, it weakens trust. As a senior, you may need support in certain areas. That is natural. Aging brings change. But needing help does not reduce your worth. It does not erase your lifetime of contribution. And it does not give anyone permission to speak down to you. Sometimes adult children forget the full story. They see only the present moment. They forget the years of invisible effort that built their foundation. You do not need to remind them aggressively. But you must not accept humiliation disguised as generosity. If support always comes with a reminder of cost, consider reducing your dependence where possible. Seek alternatives. Strengthen your independence in small ways. Because emotional freedom often begins with practical stability. And remember this clearly. Love that demands repayment is not love at its highest form. If a phrase consistently makes you feel like a burden rather than a blessing, that is a warning sign. At this stage of life, you deserve assistance that honors you, not assistance that diminishes you. And if the help offered comes attached to disrespect, walking away protects something more valuable than convenience. It protects your dignity. There are few statements more painful than this one. You're the problem. Not a discussion. Not a shared responsibility. But a direct accusation. When your child says this during conflict, it immediately shifts all blame onto you. It erases complexity. It ignores context. It reduces years of relationship into a single fault, yours. And that is deeply unfair. Every relationship has two sides. Misunderstandings happen. Generational differences exist. Emotions flare. But when one person consistently positions you as the sole problem, something unhealthy is happening. Blame without reflection is immaturity. If you attempt to discuss hurt feelings and the response is, "This is why no one wants to talk to you," or "You're always the issue," the goal is no longer resolution. The goal becomes dominance. Walking away in that moment is powerful. You can respond calmly, "I'm willing to talk when we both take responsibility." Then stop. Do not defend yourself endlessly. Do not list examples to prove your innocence. You cannot reason with someone who has already decided the verdict. Sometimes, labeling you as the problem is easier than facing their own behavior. It is easier to blame your sensitivity than to examine their tone. It is easier to criticize your reaction than to reflect on their words. And over time, if you accept this narrative, you may begin to doubt your own reality. That is dangerous. Self-doubt grows quietly. You start asking yourself, maybe I am too difficult. Maybe I ruin everything. Maybe I should just stay silent. But silence built on shame damages your spirit. Healthy adult children can say, "We both contributed to this misunderstanding." They may disagree strongly, but they do not erase your humanity. If you are consistently framed as the source of every conflict, you must pause and observe the pattern. Is there space for your perspective? Is there room for mutual growth? Or is the conversation always one-sided? Respect requires shared accountability. Walking away does not mean you refuse growth. It means you refuse unfair labeling. You remain open to self-reflection, but not to emotional scapegoating. At this stage of life, your mental peace is fragile in a different way. Constant blame can erode confidence built over decades. Protecting yourself from that erosion is wisdom. You are not flawless. But you are not the sole problem either. If a conversation becomes an attack rather than a dialogue, stepping away is not avoidance. It is protection. Few sentences are as cold as this one. "I don't owe you anything." Legally, perhaps that statement is true. Adult children are not contracts. Parenthood is not a financial agreement waiting for repayment. But emotionally, this phrase carries a sharp edge. It dismisses history. It minimizes sacrifice. It reframes love as a transaction that has expired. When a child says, "I don't owe you anything," what they are often rejecting is not debt, but responsibility. Not obligation, but gratitude. And while gratitude cannot be forced, respect should not need to be negotiated. As a parent, you likely never raised your child expecting repayment. You gave because that is what love does. You stayed up at night. You worried silently. You worked through exhaustion. Not because you were owed something later, but because they were yours. So when that lifetime of devotion is answered with emotional detachment, it wounds deeply. Walking away in that moment is essential. You can respond with quiet strength. "You're right. You don't owe me. But respect is still important." Then end the discussion. Do not argue about the past. Do not remind them of every sacrifice. Dignity does not beg to be recognized. This phrase often appears when adult children feel pressured or confronted. Instead of engaging thoughtfully, they create distance through cold logic. It becomes a shield, a way to avoid emotional accountability. But here is the truth. Healthy maturity understands nuance. A mature adult can say, "I didn't ask to be born, but I appreciate what you did." They can hold independence and gratitude at the same time. These qualities are not opposites. If "I don't owe you anything" becomes a repeated attitude rather than a one-time reaction, it reveals something deeper, a disconnect from empathy. You cannot force empathy, but you can protect yourself from indifference. At this stage of life, your heart deserves warmth, not transactional thinking. You deserve conversations that honor shared history, not erase it. Walking away is not about demanding payment. It is about refusing emotional coldness. Because while children may not owe their parents material repayment, they do owe basic human respect. And if that respect is denied repeatedly, distance becomes wisdom. You gave freely. Now protect yourself freely. Because dignity should never feel like a debt that needs defending. There may be no sentence more devastating for a parent to hear than this. You're a burden. Even if it is not spoken directly, it can be implied. Through tone. Through sighs. Through impatient gestures. Through conversations that make you feel like your existence is an inconvenience. And when that message reaches your heart, it shakes something deep. Because for most of your life, you carried others. You carried responsibilities. You carried financial weight. You carried emotional stress so your children could feel safe. Now, to feel like a burden simply because you age is heartbreaking. But listen carefully. Needing help does not make you a burden. Slowing down does not make you a burden. Asking questions, forgetting small details, or requiring assistance does not erase your value. Human life moves in cycles. There was a time when your child needed you for everything. They could not feed themselves. They could not survive alone. And you never once called them a burden. So if that word, spoken or implied, enters your relationship now, it reveals a lack of perspective. Walking away in that moment is not dramatic. It is necessary. You can say calmly, if I am too much for you, we can create space. Then give that space. Not with anger. Not with tears meant to manipulate. But with steady self-respect. Sometimes people do not understand the weight of their words until they feel absence. If your presence is treated like a problem, reduce it. If your needs are met with irritation, simplify them where possible, and seek support elsewhere if necessary. Because here is something powerful. Your worth is not determined by your productivity. You are not valuable only when you are useful. You are valuable because you are human. Because you loved. Because you gave. Because you endured. Aging is not a failure. It is a privilege denied to many. If someone cannot see that, their vision is limited, not your value. At this stage of life, emotional safety matters more than convenience. Surround yourself with those who speak gently. Those who show patience. Those who understand that someday, they too will age. If the word burden enters your relationship repeatedly, distance protects your spirit. Because love should feel like shelter, not like a weight. And you, after everything you have lived through, deserve to feel like a blessing, not an inconvenience. After hearing these 7 phrases, a difficult question remains. When is it truly time to walk away? Not forever, perhaps. Not with hatred, but with clarity. Walking away does not always mean cutting ties permanently. Sometimes it means ending a conversation. Sometimes it means shortening visits. Sometimes it means reducing emotional access until respect returns. The key is pattern. One harsh sentence spoken in anger can be repaired. One misunderstanding can be resolved. But when dismissive, blaming, or humiliating phrases become normal, that is no longer a bad day. That is a culture of disrespect. And culture shapes emotional safety. Ask yourself gently, do I feel smaller after most conversations? Do I leave interactions anxious or ashamed? Do I hesitate to speak because I expect to be dismissed? If the answer is yes, something must change. Staying in a space where your dignity is repeatedly wounded teaches others that the behavior is acceptable. Silence can be interpreted as permission. Endurance can be mistaken for agreement. Walking away interrupts that pattern. It sends a message without shouting, I value myself enough to step back. This is not manipulation. It is boundary setting. You are not punishing your child. You are protecting your emotional well-being. And here is an important truth. Distance often reveals reality. When you step back, observe what happens. Do they reach out with reflection? Do they acknowledge their tone? Do they attempt repair? Or do they simply enjoy the silence? Their response will tell you more than any argument ever could. As a senior, your time and energy are precious. You do not have endless years to spend in conflict. Peace becomes more important than pride. Stability becomes more important than being right. Walking away is not weakness. It is wisdom refined by experience. You are not abandoning love. You are refusing humiliation. You are choosing calm over chaos. You are choosing self-respect over emotional exhaustion. Sometimes, space softens hearts. Sometimes, it exposes indifference. Either way, clarity is a gift. Because at this stage of life, you deserve relationships that feel safe, respectful, and steady. If walking away is what protects that peace, then it is not a loss. It is strength.